What if I told you that a illiterate, mud-caked, flea-bitten medieval peasant, someone who didn't have running water, electricity, or even a last name, had more vacation days than you do right now? Yeah, let that satisfying little gut punch settle in for a second. Because while you're responding to Slack messages at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, grinding through your fourth cup of coffee just to survive another meeting that could have been an email, a 14th century farmer was kicking back on a saint's feast day, drinking ale and watching people chase a greased pig through the village square. And this wasn't a one-time thing. Historians estimate that medieval peasants in England had somewhere between 100 and 150 days off per year. Some estimates go even higher. Meanwhile, the average American worker gets roughly 10 paid holidays and maybe 2 weeks of vacation, if they're lucky enough to work somewhere that even offers it. That's about 30 days total if your employer is feeling generous. So how on earth did the so-called Dark Ages end up with a better work-life balance than the richest civilization in human history? Buckle up, because this story is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about progress. Now, before we go any further, let me be clear. I'm not here to romanticize the Middle Ages. Life was hard. Life expectancy was short. Medical care involved leeches and prayers. You could die from a tooth infection. But when it comes to raw hours spent working versus hours spent not working, the medieval peasant had a schedule that would make a modern remote worker jealous. The economist Juliet Shaw, in her landmark book, The Overworked American, estimated that an English peasant in the 13th century worked roughly 150 days a year. That's it. 150 days of actual labor spread across planting season and harvest season, with enormous stretches of downtime in between. Now, how did they fill those working days? The labor was physical, no doubt about it. We're talking about plowing fields with oxen, harvesting grain by hand with sickles, threshing wheat, tending livestock, and repairing fences. Sunrise to sunset during the busy seasons, absolutely. But here's the critical thing people miss. The busy seasons were seasonal. Agriculture is dictated by nature, not by quarterly earnings reports. In winter, there simply wasn't that much to do. The fields were frozen or dormant. You might mend tools, repair your home, or do small tasks around the village, but the back-breaking dawn-to-dusk labor was concentrated into specific windows of the year. The rhythm of work was intense, but punctuated by long stretches of relative rest. Compare that to the modern model, where you work roughly the same number of hours every single week for about 50 weeks a year, regardless of what season it is or whether there's actually meaningful work to be done. We've traded natural rhythms for artificial consistency, and honestly, our bodies and minds are paying the price for it. So where did all those days off actually come from? The answer is, perhaps ironically, the Catholic Church. The medieval church was arguably the most powerful institution in Europe, and it had opinions about everything, including how much people should work. And the church said, quite firmly, that people should not work on Sundays. That alone gives you 52 days off. But the church didn't stop there. Oh no. The liturgical calendar was absolutely loaded with holy days, feast days for saints, celebrations for religious events, and mandatory periods of rest and reflection. We're talking about Christmas, which wasn't just one day but often a 12-day celebration. Easter week, Whitsuntide, the Feast of the Assumption, the Feast of All Saints, dozens upon dozens of individual saints' days scattered throughout the year. And on these days, you were expected, sometimes literally required, not to work. The lord of the manor couldn't force you into the fields on a holy day. The church said no, and in the medieval world, what the church said basically functioned as law. Some historians have counted up to 70 or 80 official church holidays per year, on top of Sundays. Add them together, and you start hitting that 120 to 150 days off range very quickly. Now here's what makes this even more interesting. These weren't just days where you sat quietly in contemplation. Many of these feast days were genuine community celebrations. There was food, ale, music, dancing, games, and socializing. Villages would come together. People would rest, eat, and actually enjoy themselves. It was enforced leisure, baked into the structure of society by the most powerful institution on the continent. Imagine if your HR department sent out a company-wide email saying, "Hey, it's St. Bartholomew's Day, the office is closed, there's free food and drinks in the village green, and anyone caught sending emails will be reported to the Pope." That's basically what was happening. So what happened? How did we go from 150 days off to begging our managers for a long weekend in July? The answer is complicated, but there are a few major turning points. The first big shift came with the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. Reformers like Martin Luther, and especially John Calvin, were deeply suspicious of all those Catholic feast days. They saw them as excessive, idolatrous, and, here's the kicker, an excuse for laziness. The Puritans in particular developed what we now call the Protestant work ethic, the idea that hard work was a virtue in itself, a sign of moral character, and even evidence of divine favor. Idle hands were the devil's workshop, and all those saints' days were suddenly rebranded from sacred rest to sinful sloth. Across Protestant Europe and later in colonial America, the number of holidays was slashed dramatically. In some Puritan communities, even celebrating Christmas was banned. Banned. Let that sink in. Then came the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries, and this is where things got truly brutal. Factory owners needed workers on the floor every single day. Machines didn't care about the feast of St. Stephen. The natural rhythms of agricultural life were completely obliterated. Workers in early industrial England were routinely expected to work 14 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. Children as young as 5 were sent into mines and mills. The concept of leisure time for working people essentially evaporated. It took decades of labor organizing, strikes, and sometimes literal bloodshed to claw back basic protections like the 8-hour workday, the weekend, and the concept of paid vacation. And even now, the United States is the only advanced economy in the world that doesn't guarantee a single day of paid vacation by law. Not one. 0. Every other developed nation mandates it. The US just kind of hopes employers will be nice about it. And here's where it gets really uncomfortable, because even the free time we technically have, we've been culturally trained to feel guilty about using it. Think about how we talk about rest in modern culture. We call it doing nothing. We feel the need to justify time off by saying we needed it, as if rest requires a medical excuse. We glorify being busy. We brag about how little we sleep. We wear burnout like a badge of honor. Social media is flooded with hustle culture influencers telling you that if you're not grinding 24/7, you're falling behind. Sleep when you're dead. Rise and grind. No days off. Meanwhile, a medieval peasant was on his 3rd consecutive day of feasting for the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, slightly drunk on barley ale, watching a traveling puppet show, and nobody, not his lord, not his priest, not his neighbors, thought he was lazy for it. The system literally told him to rest. We've somehow built a world where productivity has skyrocketed. We produce vastly more per hour of labor than any medieval worker could have dreamed of. And yet we work more, rest less, and feel perpetually behind. The economist John Maynard Keynes predicted in 1930 that by now we'd all be working 15-hour weeks because technology would make us so efficient. Instead, we invented email, smartphones, and the concept of being always available, and we filled every spare moment with more work. The medieval peasant didn't have a boss who could text him at 9 p.m. When the sun went down and the holy day began, work stopped. There was no just checking in, or quick question, or sorry to bother you on your feast day. The boundary between work and rest was absolute, enforced by the church, the seasons, and the basic limitations of a world without artificial lighting. Now, I want to be careful here because, again, I am not saying we should go back to the Middle Ages. I like antibiotics. I like indoor plumbing. I am extremely fond of not dying of plague. But I think there's a genuine and important lesson buried in this comparison. The lesson is this. The amount we work is not a natural law, it's a cultural choice. Medieval society chose to build rest into the calendar because the dominant institution of the time valued it. Our society has chosen to build productivity into every waking moment because our dominant institutions Corporations, markets, hustle culture value that instead. But it doesn't have to be this way. Countries like Denmark, Germany, and France have proven that you can have a thriving economy while also guaranteeing workers 5 or 6 weeks of paid vacation. Studies consistently show that overworked employees are less productive, less creative, and more prone to errors and health problems. Rest isn't the enemy of productivity, it's the foundation of it. The medieval church understood something that modern capitalism has conveniently forgotten. People need regular, substantial, guilt-free time away from work to function as human beings. They framed it in religious terms, sure, but the underlying wisdom holds up regardless of your beliefs. Humans are not machines. We are not meant to operate at full capacity every day of the year. We need rhythm, we need seasons, we need feast days. So the next time you're sitting at your desk at 5:30 p.m. on a Friday, watching the clock, dreaming about 2 measly days off before you do it all again on Monday, just remember that a medieval peasant living in a one-room hut with a dirt floor had more days off in a year than you do. And he didn't even have to submit a PTO request. History is full of these weird, humbling little reminders that progress isn't always a straight line, and that sometimes the past got things right that we've somehow gotten wrong. If this video made you rethink your relationship with work, or at least gave you some excellent ammunition for your next argument about why you deserve more vacation days, do me a favor, smash that like button. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. If you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss future videos where we dig into the weird, surprising, and occasionally infuriating corners of history. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling me how many days off you get per year, and whether you think a medieval peasant had it better than you. I read every single comment, and I have a feeling this one is going to spark some incredible conversations. Thanks for watching, and may you find your own feast day this week. You've earned it.